So, Jeremy,
unity.
what kind of a contribution would you like to make along your professional lines to the concept of unity, development of that kind of a consciousness?
I think, wait, let me just have a little tea here. I think I can think about that in two different but related ways. One is that I developed a set of ideas a number of years ago, which I was actually going to write a book about. I never wrote the book, but it's still how I think about things, and I think I've mentioned it to you in conversation. But it's a system of thinking about human affairs that I call Zen socialism. And
this is the first time you'll delineate that for me.
Oh, okay. So, but part of the but a practical aspect of that has to do with the idea that because people rationalize in the Western tradition with its orientation towards rationality in thinking about society or organizations or human affairs has always been oriented towards thinking about what's the maximally rational society. And this is the way that I think about it, the Zen socialist way of thinking is, how can we arrive at the minimally rational society? What's the society that we could have? What's the minimum amount of rationality that we could have in order to function successfully as a group in a relationship, as a social order? And the reason for that is that, and this is something, of course, that psychoanalytic theory has contributed a lot to, people rationalize. And so a lot of what presents itself as rationality is actually the rationalization of things that are irrational, non-rational, or anti-rational. People have intense emotions, but they present them as theories and ideologies and so on. So I've always had the idea that, and this involves things we don't have time to go into, to the extent to which people could reduce their need to rationalize things in this Freudian way of justifying or projecting or distorting emotional things, then it would be possible for people to actually figure out mutual understanding and agreement, because there wouldn't be the need to impose on other people certain things which are just coming out of irrational needs and urges, and it would be easier to arrive at unity among people around the things that are important to be united about. Jürgen Habermas, who is one of my intellectual influences, was one of my teachers, wrote an essay called The Unity of Reason in the Diversity of Its Voices. It's a title something like that. And I think, I don't actually even remember right now what the main point of that particular article was, but I think it's recognizing that we live in a world where people come from such cultural and social and political and psychological and belief system differences that for people to arrive at any kind of rational consensus, we have to get clear about what is important to have rational mutual understanding about, and what things are things that we should just let flourish on their own and do not require us to have agreement about or common understanding.
That would be based more on an intuitive type of a relationship where you're just not really thinking about it as much, i.e. not as rational, and you're just moving based on the kind of intuition that you use at a table to understand the deeper things that are going on?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's both. I think it requires an enhanced clarity about the process of reason and discussion and communication and argument and so on, and an enhanced capacity to relate to people in an emotional, aesthetic, intuitive, bodily, nonverbal way, and that those things are actually complementary, you know. So that's anyway. That's an important part of how I think about this.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. What's your vision for the unity? How you see the future? Do you see the unity in the future?
Well, I have to distinguish between what I would like and what I think is likely, because I have I have some significant skepticism about whether human beings and human society in the present are capable of catching up to and dealing with the complexity that is generated by their society, their economy, their technology, and so on. Like climate change is an obvious example. In the long run, it might be possible for people to come to a rational understanding about the environment and ecology and how to have an ecologically rational society. But by the time they come to that understanding, who knows what environment there will be. So I have in my mind a clear distinction between what my vision, desired goal would be, and what I consider likely, which have become a bit pessimistic about, even though I'm by nature an optimist and a utopian. So, I would say that, to take a simple example, I think it would be much more possible to have a social order shaped by common purpose and common values and respect of other people's different values and ways of being, if people didn't work as much and had more free time for the expansion of their personal, cultural, spiritual dimensions and aesthetic dimensions. But our society seems to be in this phase of increasing the amount of time people are spending working and being slaves to the economic / technological machine. I love the writer Henry Miller, and in one of his greatest books, Stroke of Capricorn. In reality, he worked for a while, this is in the 1920s and 30s, as a manager for Western Union. But in his book, he always refers to himself as having worked for the Cosmodemonic Telegraph Company. And I love the phrase cosmodemonic. So I think we live in a cosmodemonic society that interferes with people having the freedom, mental space, and space for self-development, which I think is one of the preconditions for arriving at mutual understanding and unity. So, for example, I personally believe that the role of art and aesthetics is central to any kind of a really humane education and humane culture. And that also it's one of the things that enables people to more appreciate unity in difference. But right now in the United States, arts education is being eliminated from the schools and places where it used to exist. So I'm really aware of the tension between things which I believe are actually possible for human beings at this, 2011, at this point in our history, and what things are likely because of the persistence of all kinds of social, psychological, cultural, ideological, and religious factors which act as impediments to mutual understanding, unity, and harmony. So I believe one needs to work for those things, but I take their realizability with a grain of salt.
It sounds like you're saying it'd be much more likely for a positive outcome with less slaving to a machine, and more development toward our inner being.
Yes, absolutely.
Can I ask you who you would like to hear speak on the topic that we've been speaking on, the topic of unity? Particular people or particular disciplines? As a final quick question.
Well, several things. First of all, because for me personally, almost everything Jürgen Habermas has to say always has some innovative and illuminating quality. I'd be interested in knowing his current thinking about that. Second of all, because I find Buddhist thought to be particularly attentive to the issues of what is oneness and what is unity, and actually, in some versions, maintains that to be enlightened means getting beyond the distinction between unity and non-unity. That for an enlightened person, unity no longer exists because unity exists in relation to what is not unity. But if you're enlightened, you've gone beyond that distinction. So I'd be interested in hearing how some really thoughtful Buddhist thinkers think about that and its current implications. And I think I'd also be interested in certain psychologists and people who have also studied psychological and spiritual evolution to understand what's involved, what processes are involved in people who do attain to higher awareness of an orientation towards unity, kind of a healthy unity, something like that. So that would be of interest to me personally.
Well, Jeremy, thank you very much for answering the questions and partaking in this interview with the Foundation of Unity here in your living room in New York City. And thank you for your work at Fielding Graduate University. And